But suddenly the unimaginable happens. A mysterious rust is eating its way through the inside of Lady Liberty. In just a few days, the world's most famous statue could sink into the sea forever. And of all people, Aunt Virginia believes she is to blame. When Klaus, Hanna and Fabio find her in despair in front of the TV, they have no idea they're about to be swept into the greatest adventure of their lives. And now, get comfortable and start dreaming, because this adventure takes place in real locations, places you can discover for yourself, and maybe this story will soon become your own adventure. And now here we go. Klaus Bekker, New York, Saving Lady Liberty. Klaus and Hanna met in the afternoon at Aunt Virginia's antique shop and were surprised to find her sitting in front of the TV, completely captivated by the latest news. Klaus had never seen his aunt with the TV on before. In fact, he had always assumed that the ancient device, a tube TV from the 60s that didn't even have a remote control and could only show black and white pictures, had broken down long ago. But now the old thing was flickering, and Aunt Virginia was sitting in front of it so spellbound that she didn't even notice Klaus and Hanna standing next to her for several minutes. On the TV, there was a report from New York that was clearly causing Aunt Virginia great concern. New York's famous landmark, the Statue of Liberty, was afflicted by a mysterious rust that was virtually eating it away from the inside. Numerous scientists had already tried to save Lady Liberty, as New Yorkers call their Statue of Liberty, but no one could stop the voracious rust. The Statue of Liberty would collapse in the next few days and sink into the sea forever. Only when the report was over did Aunt Virginia notice that she was no longer alone. She turned to the children, her face pale as ash, looking as if she was about to burst into tears. Full of concern, Klaus sat down next to her and put his arm around his aunt. "What's wrong?" he asked. Then Aunt Virginia began to sob softly and whispered, "The Statue of Liberty is dying, and I alone am to blame." Meanwhile, in distant New York, the Baron was rubbing his hands with joy. The Baron was Aunt Virginia's old arch-enemy. For many decades, he had been trying to put her out of business for good. At the same time, he scraped money together wherever he could. No deal was too shady or immoral for him. The main thing was that he made a good profit from it. And his latest deal would bring him several $1 million, because some time ago he had secured the building rights on the land around Lady Liberty. Should the Statue of Liberty finally sink forever, he could build several high-rises in its place, no matter how much New Yorkers would mourn their beloved landmark. The death of Lady Liberty would be the biggest deal of his life. Meanwhile, in Cologne, Aunt Virginia was still sitting in front of the TV, full of worry, when Fabio came into the shop. He was angry, so angry that he didn't notice the depressed mood in the shop at all. On the contrary, he immediately started babbling. "They seriously tell me I'm too small. Bastards, I'm only 3 years younger than them." Then he plopped down into an armchair and grumbled to himself. Klaus looked at Hanna. What's wrong with him? But Hanna didn't know either. She stood next to Fabio, put her arm around him and asked caringly, "Come on, tell us what's bothering you so much." Hesitantly, Fabio began to speak. "Oh, there's this graffiti gang at school. They spray all over the city. I thought they were cool and wanted to join them. But they just laughed at me and told me to stick to colored pencils." "I know those guys," Hanna said. "They think they're the greatest. Don't worry about them. You'll be the most legendary graffiti artist in the whole city one day and have your own gang." Fabio looked at Hanna gratefully. Somehow his friends always managed to brighten his mood. However, Klaus wasn't really succeeding with Aunt Virginia. On the contrary, by now big tears were rolling down her cheeks. "She's dying and I alone am to blame." Only now did Fabio notice what was going on here. Unlike him, Aunt Virginia seemed to have really big problems. He felt ashamed for just bursting in with his bad mood. Fortunately, Klaus now pulled himself together and finally spoke to his aunt. "Why are you to blame if the Statue of Liberty is rusting? That can't be true, can it?" Fortunately, Aunt Virginia had calmed down a bit. She blew her nose and began to speak softly. Of course you couldn't know this, but I used to be very close friends with the great-grandson of the builder of the Statue of Liberty, Paul. Hanna looked astonished. And Paul's great-grandpa is Gustav Eiffel, who built the Eiffel Tower? Exactly him, Aunt Virginia nodded. He designed the steel structure that supports Lady Liberty on the inside. The three children looked at each other in astonishment. But they were used to Aunt Virginia having her very own secrets. So, do you want to hear the story or not? Of course, the three children did and nodded excitedly. Well, Paul Eiffel and I were very good friends. I think he was even a little in love with me back then. Here, he gave me this ring. She took a ring off her finger and gave it to Hanna. A really very pretty ring, Hanna thought. He must have really liked you. Aunt Virginia nodded and smiled. Paul said that his great-grandpa had made a mistake in the construction of Lady Liberty. The steel alloy, as it's called when you combine different metals, wasn't protected against a very special kind of rust. And that's why he constructed Mr. Liberty. Klaus looked astonished. There are two statues of Liberty? Not really, Aunt Virginia laughed. Mr. Liberty is only about 30 centimeters tall, but he constructed him so that one day he could free his big sister from the dangerous rust. And what do you have to do with it now? Klaus still didn't understand what Aunt Virginia was getting at. Well, this part of the story seemed a bit uncomfortable for Aunt Virginia, but after a short pause, she continued. Gustav Eiffel had given Mr. Liberty to Paul's father to keep safe back then. He was supposed to look after him. Shortly before his death, he passed it on to his son Paul, but shortly after we met, Paul became very ill and wanted to give me the statue for safekeeping. But I just didn't feel ready for such a big, important task yet. I guess I was too young. Klaus had another question. And where is Mr. Liberty now? With him we could easily save the Statue of Liberty, right? Well, that's the problem, Aunt Virginia said. Unfortunately, nobody knows. The figure has been missing ever since. Now the children knew why Aunt Virginia felt so guilty. Klaus took the ring from Hanna's hand and looked at it closely. Maybe there was a clue hidden here. And at that very moment, it happened. Klaus had one of his visions. When he took an object in his hand, it could happen that he could see events from the past that were connected to this object. It would then play like a movie in his mind's eye. His friends knew about this secret. Otherwise, Klaus kept it hidden from everyone else. A few times he had even managed to look a few minutes into the future, but he couldn't control that himself. It just happened without him being able to do anything about it. And now he saw a scene that lay more than 100 years in the past. He saw Paul Eiffel writing his will. Next to him stood a small statue which was certainly Mr. Liberty, and Klaus could hear what Paul decreed in his will. I will bring Mr. Liberty to New York and, with the help of my heirs, hide 4 clues in the city. When the Statue of Liberty is in danger, I hope that a chosen one will come, find my clues, and save Lady Liberty. The search begins where the best espresso in the world is served. With that, the vision ended. But he now knew what to do. Klaus turned to Aunt Virginia. Then he turned to his friends. Fancy a trip to New York? The direct flight from Cologne to New York the next morning took 9 hours. But due to the time difference, Klaus, Hanna and Fabio had only lost 3 hours. So they still had the whole day to find Mr. Liberty and save the Statue of Liberty. Klaus looked at his watch. We still can't afford to lose any time. Lady Liberty could tip over in just a few days. If we want to save her, it has to be this weekend. Hanna nodded. But where should they look? Klaus walked ahead confidently as he hailed a yellow cab, one of New York's famous taxis. I already have an idea. We should be there in just under half an hour. However, the Baron had his spies everywhere. This time they reported to him that Aunt Virginia's nephew had just arrived in New York with his 2 friends. He muttered, and then gave instructions to follow the 3 of them at every turn, if possible. I'm definitely not letting them ruin the biggest deal of my life. At the same time, Klaus, Hanna and Fabio arrived in Little Italy after an almost 1-hour drive from John F. Kennedy Airport to Manhattan. The three of them were amazed as they walked down central Mulberry Street because the neighborhood felt like a living movie set. Cozy cafes and Italian restaurants with small tables and the typical red and white checkered tablecloths on the sidewalks were packed tightly together. Even more eye-catching were the many historic facades and old walls. After all, the area used to be one of the city's largest working-class neighborhoods. While Klaus and Hanna tried to get their bearings, Fabio had seen something much more exciting. In a small side street, a group of teenagers, maybe 2 or 3 years older than him, were busy spraying a wall with their spray cans. Curious, Fabio came closer, and immediately the group turned to face him. One of the sprayers shouted, "What do you want here? Are you gonna snitch on us?" Fabio raised his arms placatingly. "On the contrary, I'm a huge fan of your graffiti, and I'm just admiring how cool you make it look." The graffiti gang liked that. One of them even threw Fabio a spray can. "Here, you can join in. Fill in the letters. But if the cops come, you're on your own to get out of here." Fabio didn't need to be told twice. Finally, he was a member of a graffiti gang, even if only for a short time. Meanwhile, Klaus had consulted with Hanna on where to look. Ferrara Bakery is the oldest shop here and the first espresso bar ever in New York. If Gustav Eiffel drank his espresso anywhere, it was definitely here. Hanna looked around. Where is Fabio anyway? But then she could see him in the side street, happily decorating a wall together with his new friends. Grinning, the two strolled into the alley and stood next to him. "Fabio, you know we have things to take care of, right?" Fabio looked guilty. "All right, I'll put my jacket back on quickly." He handed Klaus his spray can, and at that very moment, something very strange happened. Klaus had a vision of the future. He saw 2 patrol cars that would turn the corner into this very street in about 2 minutes. He shouted loudly to the teenagers, "You should get out of here, the police will be here in a minute." "You have to listen to him. My buddy sometimes knows things like that. Don't ask me why, but he's definitely telling the truth." He saw 2 patrol cars that would turn the corner into this very street in about 2 minutes. He shouted loudly to the teenagers, "You should get out of here. The police will be here in a minute." The sprayers looked at him in surprise, but Fabio now urged them too. "You have to listen to him. My buddy sometimes knows things like that. Don't ask me why, but he's definitely telling the truth." The leader of the gang looked at him sharply, then nodded and called out to his friends, "You heard him. Let's beat it." In no time, the teenagers had packed up their spray cans, taken off their caps, and turned their jackets inside out so that no one could see the telltale paint splatters. Now they were indistinguishable from the many tourists in the neighborhood. And indeed, they hadn't gone even 100 meters when 2 New York patrol cars turned the corner with sirens wailing and stopped right in front of the freshly painted wall. The police officers, who are called cops in New York, got out and one ran his hand over the wall. The paint is still completely fresh. A second cop waved it off. "Then we're out of luck. We'll catch them red-handed eventually." Then they got back into their cars and drove off. The teenagers, who had witnessed everything from a safe distance along with Klaus, Hanna and Fabio, looked dumbfounded and then patted Fabio appreciatively on the shoulder. "Man, you saved our butts. We owe you one. Thanks." And with that, the gang quickly disappeared into the bustling streets. Hanna looked a little annoyed at Fabio. "That's all we would have needed for you to get arrested here." But Fabio was beaming from ear to ear. "Whatever," he said. "I haven't even been in New York for half an hour and I'm already a real graffiti artist." Fabio looked so happy that Hanna had to smile too. No one could stay mad at their buddy Fabio for very long. "Then hurry up now. We have a mission after all." Less than 5 minutes later, the three entered the famous Ferrara Bakery. It smelled enticingly of espresso and fresh Italian pastries. The floor consisted of stylish mosaic tiles, while dark wood paneling and cast iron columns gave the walls a timeless glow. Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio went to the back of the cafe, past the line at the counter. Klaus thought to himself, Gustav Eiffel spent his whole life working with all kinds of metals. If there's a clue hidden here, it's definitely in the metal columns. Look around inconspicuously. Fortunately, there were only a few columns in the place, so they didn't have to search for too long. It was Hanna who finally spotted something. Over here, she called softly, waving her friends over. There's something like a seal here. Klaus took a closer look at the seal. I read all about Mr. Eiffel on the plane. That's the seal of his French workshop. We're very close. He wanted to kneel down and search under the seal, but unfortunately a rather grim-looking waiter was now standing next to them. Do you want to order something, or just loiter here? Unfortunately, Klaus and Hanna didn't have an answer to that right away. Fabio, on the other hand, did. He grinned at Klaus and whispered, While you were reading all about Gustav Eiffel, I learned all about Italian pastries. Then he turned to the waiter. We need a whole box, but only the best. 2 of the cannoli, but please the ones with extra pistachios, plus rainbow cookies with real marzipan filling, and for our aunt in Cologne, the pasticcini with strawberries. Pack it all up nicely, please. While the waiter was busy stacking Fabio's order into boxes and tying everything with colorful ribbons, Klaus and Hanna had all the time in the world to examine the bottom of the column. How good that our Fabio is so greedy, Hanna giggled. Quickly, Klaus wiped the bottom edge of the column clean with his sleeve, and now 2 words could be seen carved into the iron. It says Brooklyn Bridge there, Klaus announced triumphantly. And underneath is a small sketch. Hanna quickly $200, but after all, they had also come a good deal closer to solving the riddle. And Fabio was overjoyed to have enough provisions for the whole day. The way from Little Italy to the Brooklyn Bridge wasn't far, and they made the distance in just under 20 minutes. Unfortunately, however, the Baron's helpers had already picked up the 3 children's trail and were watching their every move. Here in the middle of Manhattan, they couldn't just grab and kidnap the children. The probability of being surprised and arrested by the police was too high. And since the Baron himself lived here in New York, it would probably only be a matter of time before the trail could be traced back to him. Therefore, he gave the order not to let the 3 out of their sight and to wait for further instructions. Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio had no idea about any of this. The latter was chewing with full cheeks the entire time. On the way, they studied the sketch that Gustav Eiffel's great-grandson had left them on the column in the Ferrara bakery in peace. One of the neo-Gothic stone arches of the Brooklyn Bridge can be seen here, Klaus explained. Unfortunately, we don't know which one is meant. If necessary, we'll have to examine all the arches. Fabio groaned. But that could take hours. Their walk led them, after 3 blocks from Little Italy, directly into the heart of Chinatown. It was amazing how quickly Manhattan's cityscape had changed here. Instead of Italian restaurants, one now saw numerous Chinese shops with exotic fruits and spices. Even the street signs were written in Chinese characters. In Columbus Park, which they were crossing now, locals were playing mahjong, an old Chinese board game. The 3 of them would have loved to sit down and watch, but they knew they had to hurry. Already, the impressive Manhattan Municipal Building could be seen, a 40-story skyscraper that housed most of the city administration's offices. Right next to it stood New York City Hall, the actual City Hall of New York, a building dating back to 1812, which stood in the middle of a small park and was the seat of the mayor. Hanna was amazed at how many historic buildings and neighborhoods stood side by side in such a tight space here in New York. She could have spent days, no weeks here in the city without being bored for even a single minute. But Klaus kept urging them to hurry. And he was right. After all, it was about saving the landmark of the city and the free world. And who knows how quickly this destructive rust would eat its way further and perhaps destroy the whole city. No, they had to find Mr. Liberty here and today, otherwise New York might be lost forever. Back home in Cologne, Uncle Theo had joined Aunt Virginia in the antique shop. Aunt Virginia was still very depressed and shouldn't be left home alone. But it wasn't just her state of mind that was worrying Uncle Theo. Aunt Virginia was getting weaker by the minute. Had some illness befallen her? Then Aunt Virginia remembered a letter that Paul Eiffel had once sent her, shortly before his death. She had been very surprised by the content back then and had almost forgotten it, but now it suddenly seemed to make sense. She dug the letter out of an old box and gave it to Uncle Theo. He read it aloud. My dear Virginia, I have brought Mr. Liberty to New York. I hope he is safe there. If not, I have hidden a clue, dearest Virginia. It is hidden weatherproof in a capsule on the western central pier of the Brooklyn Bridge. In eternal love, your Paul. Uncle Theo put the letter aside and looked at Aunt Virginia. He must have loved you very much, your Paul, he said. Aunt Virginia nodded weakly, but Uncle Theo also understood that they had to send this clue to the children immediately. Uncle Theo reached for the phone. The children absolutely need to know this. Virginia may say, for Lady Liberty, it's a matter of life and death. The children were standing at the intersection of Center Street and Park Row, right in the shadow of the massive municipal building, when Klaus got the call from Uncle Theo. After he hung up, Hanna asked, "What's going on?" Fortunately, Aunt Virginia kept an old letter from Gustav Eiffel's great-grandson. "I know where we need to go now." Right in front of them was the wooden ramp that led up as a pedestrian bridge to the Brooklyn Bridge, which they now climbed. The ramp was very busy. Tourists with selfie sticks, commuters on bicycles, and street vendors selling photos of the skyline crowded the narrow wooden walkway. Klaus pointed ahead. "We have to get to the first big stone pillar on the Brooklyn side," he shouted over the noise. They walked for about 5 minutes over the creaking wooden planks until they reached the second of the two monumental neo-Gothic stone arches. The grey granite looked even more massive from up here than from the ground. Klaus compared the cross on his sketch with the inside of the arch. "The cross is marked right here at eye level," he noted. While Klaus and Hanna searched the smooth stone surfaces, Fabio noticed that something was stuck behind one of the iron braces connecting the railing to the stone. "Here, this doesn't look like part of the bridge." Klaus took a closer look at the spot and realized what Fabio meant. Something was fastened in a recess here. It was a small weatherproof capsule, inconspicuously attached to an iron plate on the pillar with a strong magnet. With a lot of strength, Klaus managed to detach the capsule. Excitedly, they opened the sphere, which was put together in the middle. Inside lay a card, not much bigger than a postage stamp. There was no text on it, but a kind of collage which the three children now looked at. In the background, you could see the chaos of light and advertising of Times Square. In the middle of this picture, someone had pasted a hand-drawn guitar and a tiny pair of white underpants. Fabio couldn't make heads or tails of it. Hanna, however, immediately put two and two together. That's the naked cowboy. He's the most famous man in Times Square. If Mr. Liberty is hidden somewhere there, he'll definitely know. He stands in the same spot there every day. Fabio scratched his head. But seriously, Paul Eiffel has been dead for a long time. He definitely never met the naked cowboy. But Klaus knew the answer. Then it was his heirs. He instructed them to preserve the secret of Mr. Liberty forever. They've just kept hiding new, up-to-date clues in New York all these years. "Then let's go," Hanna said, rushing down the wooden ramp. "We have to save Aunt Virginia." And it was high time, because back in Cologne, Aunt Virginia had long been feeling the effects of her fateful connection to Lady Liberty. She was so worried that she had a fainting spell. No matter what Uncle Theo tried, he just couldn't calm her down. All her hope now lay with Klaus and his friends. The three friends in far-off New York were really picking up the pace now. Hanna had found out that the fastest connection between Brooklyn Bridge and Times Square is a ride on the Underground, which is simply called the subway here. They ran to City Hall Station, swiped their Metro cards, as the tickets are called, and boarded the rattling number 6 train. The train lurched through the dark tunnels of Manhattan, past flickering lights. At the huge Grand Central hub, they changed trains, and just a few minutes later, the subway spat them out at Times Square. Times Square is perhaps the most famous square in the whole world, and the beating heart of Manhattan, where New York never sleeps. As soon as Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio left the subway via the stairs, they were swallowed up by a gigantic wall of light and color. House-high LED walls tower up everywhere, blasting advertisements into the urban canyons at a rapid pace and lighting up the square as bright as day, even at night. The bright neon light was reflected in the windows of the yellow cabs that honked their way through the crowds. Between street performers, glowing advertisements, and the endless stream of tourists, there is an almost electric energy that makes the ground shake beneath your feet. This was one of the most impressive sights the children had ever experienced, and certainly one they would never forget for the rest of their lives. But unfortunately, they had far too little time to enjoy it all. They had to find the naked cowboy in the huge bustle as quickly as possible. The naked cowboy is a true original and a living legend in Times Square. Despite his name, he is of course not completely naked, but wears brief white underpants, a matching white Stetson hat, and cowboy boots. A worn acoustic guitar dangles in front of his chest, with his stage name emblazoned on it in large letters. His skin is deeply tanned and weathered from countless hours in the New York sun. With a broad, unshakable grin and a deep voice, he embodies a mixture of showmanship and pure good humor. He was easy to find because, as always, he was surrounded by numerous fans and tourists. Everyone wanted to see him, take a photo with him, or just listen to his voice. When the three children reached him, they didn't really know what to do next. Klaus decided to just take the plunge. What did they have to lose? "I think I'll just talk to him," Klaus said, trying to squeeze through the fans to the front row. However, the Baron's henchmen were hot on their heels here too, keeping a close eye on them. Their leader was just contacting the Baron. "We're at Times Square and the three brats are standing around here. What should we do?" The Baron thought for a moment. It had been clear to him for some time that they were looking for the little Mr. Liberty and wanted to heal the Statue of Liberty, because he too had studied Gustav Eiffel extensively. That would ruin all his plans for immense wealth and simply could not be allowed to happen. So he ordered his men, "Maybe it's easier to grab all three of them in the middle of the crowd and then disappear. The cops won't even notice, so grab them." Meanwhile, Klaus had reached the front row and was now standing right in front of the cowboy. Just as he finished a song, Klaus gathered all his courage and spoke to him. Excuse me, Mr. Cowboy. We're from Germany and it's really an emergency. Do you happen to know anything about a small statue, about a certain Mr. Liberty?" Meanwhile, Hanna and Fabio had also arrived in the front row and looked at the cowboy hopefully. He looked surprised for a moment, but then, to Klaus's relief, smiled even wider than he usually did anyway. "What do you want to do with Mr. Liberty?" he asked friendly. And Klaus answered like a shot. "Save the Statue of Liberty, of course, and with it maybe the whole city of New York. But we can't do it without help." To his surprise, the naked cowboy let out a loud, happy, yippee sound. Then he leaned down to the children and beamed. "I've been waiting 20 years for you to finally come." "Why is that?" Klaus asked in surprise. "Quite simple. 20 years ago, someone gave me something to keep safe, to give to whoever is looking for Mr. Liberty. And finally you're here." The children were overjoyed, because once again they were one step closer to solving their riddle. But at that very moment, the Baron's men struck. They lunged at Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio, trying to grab them. The naked cowboy stood protectively in front of the children. "Please help us," Klaus pleaded. "I think they've been shadowing us for a while and want to take us out." "No problem," the cowboy grinned. "After all, you're among friends here. Then he turned to the crowd and shouted loudly, "To all my fans here, these 6 men are enemies of mine. They are enemies of my music and enemies of New York. Can you help us?" In a flash, a jolt went through the crowd, and dozens of the Naked Cowboys fans lunged at the Baron's henchmen. They had a hard time escaping the tumult and saving their skins. The cowboy seized this moment and took Klaus by the hand. "Follow me. I know where it's a bit quieter." Right around the corner in a side street stood a small silver caravan, an Airstream, one of the coolest campers ever. The cowboy opened the door, let the children in, and slipped into the trailer himself. "This is my little retreat. We're safe here for the moment." Behind the shiny metal door of the camper, it was suddenly quiet. It smelled of old wood and guitar wax. Inside here, the cowboy suddenly seemed much more serious, and not at all like the loud tourist attraction. He pulled out an old box and said, "Over 20 years ago, this man came to me. He said he was a descendant of Gustav Eiffel, who built the Statue of Liberty. And if someone came to me, meaning you, looking for Mr. Liberty, I should hand this over to them." Klaus took the box in his hand and opened it. Inside was a heavy coin which Klaus took in his hand. On the front, the Empire State Building was visible. On the back, the Statue of Liberty with a small telescope symbol and a circle of small stars. Fabio also took it in his hand now. "And what do we do with it?" But Hanna already had an answer ready. "Quite simple. We go up the Empire State Building and put the coin into one of the telescopes." That made sense to everyone, and the Naked Cowboy put his broad grin back on too. "In any case, New York's future doesn't look quite as bleak now as it did before. Here, I have another gift for you." He pulled out 3 t-shirts with the inscription, "New York Liberty Crew." "Put these on, then you'll look like an official team and will be let through all the barriers." The children thanked him profusely. They knew they had found a friend for life in the Naked Cowboy. The Baron, on the other hand, was seething with rage. His men had actually let themselves be put to flight by a half-naked singer and his fans. That had better not happen to them again, or they would feel his unbridled wrath. His orders were clear and direct. The men were to fan out, find the children, and neutralize them as quickly as possible. At the same time, the children walked down 7th Avenue from bright Times Square. New York is loud and crowded, but in their new crew shirts, they no longer felt like little tourists, but like professionals on an important mission. And after all, they were. As they turned left at the corner of 34th Street, the massive Empire State Building, which was the tallest building in the world for a long time, suddenly towered into the sky in front of them. However, the queue of people wanting to go up stretched all the way around the block. "It could take hours before we get in there," Hanna groaned. But Klaus had long had a completely different plan. "We're not tourists, after all. We are the Liberty Crew. Just stay behind me and try to look important." While Fabio was still pondering how to actually look important, Klaus had already approached a few security guards who were checking the crowds of tourists in their uniforms. He simply walked past them and straight towards the side entrance for employees and suppliers. Fabio and Hanna followed close on his heels. Suddenly, a grim-looking security guard with a walkie-talkie stepped in their way and raised his hand. He actually wanted to send them away, but then he saw the distinctive Liberty Crew t-shirts. That was the moment Klaus went ahead with his plan. He pulled out the brass coin and held it under the guard's nose. Then he said briefly and in an authoritative tone, "Special assignment due to the Liberty crisis. We have to get to the top deck immediately." The guard hesitated for a moment, but saw Klaus's determined look, then the professional shirts, and finally the important-looking coin. Without further ado, he opened the barrier and radioed his colleagues. "Let the 3 of them through, that's the crew." Klaus grinned as they entered the building and whispered to his friends, "That's how it is in New York." And finally the important-looking coin. Without further ado, he opened the barrier and radioed his colleagues, "Let the 3 of them through, that's the crew." Klaus grinned as they entered the building and whispered to his friends, "That's how it is in New York." You just have to make yourself look important, then you'll be respected. After that, they were led straight to one of the silver high-speed lifts. While the normal people had to wait for hours, Klaus, Hanna and Fabio shot up to the 86th floor in record time. When they reached the platform at the top, they could see the many coin-operated telescopes standing there. There were easily several dozen lining the entire parapet of the viewing points. "Which telescope is the right one now?" Hanna asked. "We can't possibly try them all." But Klaus had an idea. He looked closely at the coin again, especially the circle of stars on the back. "It must be these stars here. We have to look for them," he called out to his friends. And so it was. In less than 5 minutes, Fabio had spotted the right telescope. "Over here, come here," he shouted loudly to drown out the whistling wind. Klaus had the coin in his hand and immediately realized what Fabio meant. Next to the coin slot, where tourists could insert their quarters, as the $quarter-dollar coins are called in New York, several stars were depicted in a circle exactly like on his coin. He didn't hesitate and threw it in. Instead of just opening up the view, the device began to hum quietly. As Klaus looked through the lens, he no longer saw the normal New York, but the telescope filtered everything else out and zoomed in with incredible precision on the Statue of Liberty in the distance. Through the prepared telescope, Lady Liberty appeared in a golden glow. Deep inside the torch, where normally no tourist gets to go, Klaus recognized a small glowing silhouette. It was Mr. Liberty. The small statue had been deposited right on the spot by Paul Eiffel. "I've got him," Klaus shouted against the wind. "He's stuck right in the torch. That's the hiding place." Now the three children knew where the destination of their journey lay. Back onto the water, straight into the heart of Lady Liberty, before the great statue would finally crumble. Klaus urged his friends to hurry, because they had not a second more to lose. From the Empire State Building, they took the subway for about 30 minutes and got off at Battery Park. This is where the ferries to Liberty Island stopped. Hanna wondered, why do they still let tourists go to the Statue of Liberty, even though it could fall over? Klaus shrugged. Probably they don't want panic to break out. In New York, people always believe in a last-second rescue. It was only a few yards to the ferry. Then it suddenly happened. 6 tough-looking guys stood in their way. The Baron's men had spotted them. Their leader grinned mockingly. "Well, now you don't have a naked cowboy to get you out of a jam, do you?" The children were trapped, and the men didn't look like they wanted to negotiate. On the contrary, they immediately lunged at Klaus and his friends. Where were they supposed to flee now? Retreat was impossible. After all, they had to reach one of the ferries. But fortunately, they weren't as alone as the crooks had hoped. On the contrary, because out of nowhere, the graffiti gang that Fabio had met at the very beginning of their adventure now appeared. And the sprayers, at least 20 of them, immediately lunged at the crooks. They quickly realized they stood no chance against the superior numbers and retreated meekly. The leader of the gang went up to Klaus, laughing. "I told you we owed you one. We've been watching you to protect you. I think we're even now." Then he turned to Fabio, took off his cap and put it on him. "And from now on, you're one of us, a real New York graffiti sprayer. You're always welcome with us." Fabio was almost bursting with pride, because that was exactly what he had always dreamed of. Hanna quickly took a photo as a souvenir, while Klaus thanked the sprayers. And then they moved on to the final stop of their adventure. The ferry crossing took less than 20 minutes. Here at the pier, at the foot of the statue, there was great excitement, however. The rangers guarding the statue had now decided to close the entire site to tourists and staff. The rust had already ravaged the inside of the figure too much, and it threatened to tip over in the next few minutes. In all the confusion, Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio managed to slip past the staff, and a few moments later, the last ferry departed. They were now completely alone on the Statue of Liberty and could complete their final task. Klaus had seen exactly where they had to go through the telescope, all the way up into the torch. He opened a small maintenance door in the pedestal of the statue, which was actually only intended for technicians. There was a narrow spiral staircase, and without hesitating, they began the climb. The spiral staircase wound like a spiral through the body of Lady Liberty. and as they climbed the steps, they heard the worrying cracking of the rust eating through the metal. Arriving at the top in the crown, they stood before the actual obstacle. A steep, narrow ladder led further up from here, directly into the outstretched arm of the statue. A sign read, "Entry strictly forbidden," but Klaus didn't let that stop him. "This way," he called out to his friends. He climbed ahead, his heart pounding in his throat as he went through the narrow tunnel of the arm. Beneath his feet, he felt the swaying of the statue in the wind. Finally, they reached the small hatch that led directly onto the platform of the Golden Torch. Up here, high above New York Harbor, the hiding place of Mr. Liberty had to be found. Klaus looked closely at the metal floor plates, and indeed, on a plate in front of him, the stars arranged in a circle were visible again. "Come on, we have to lift the plate somehow. If we all try together, maybe we can do it." And indeed, with combined forces, they were able to lift the plate. And there he actually lay, the roughly 30-centimeter tall Mr. Liberty. Klaus lifted the figure out. At the bottom, instead of a base, he had small prongs, almost like a key. And while he was still looking at the figure, he had another of his visions. He could once again see Gustav Eiffel, the designer of the Statue of Liberty, inserting the small Mr. Liberty into something that looked like a large keyhole. With that, his vision ended. But Klaus had seen enough. He looked around. In the middle of the platform, he finally found what he was looking for. Where the flame of Lady Liberty is anchored in the floor of the torch, there was a massive round ring of heavy cast iron. Klaus noticed that one of the metal plates at the bottom of the ring protruded slightly. He knelt down and wiped the thick red rust aside. Beneath it, a brass plate appeared, which was again decorated with the stars arranged in a circle. Klaus was breathing heavily, sweat pouring down his face by now. But after he had wiped away the rust, he could see a circular recess in the middle of the plate. That had to be the lock, right in the center of the floor of the torch, virtually in the foundation of the fire. Quickly, he inserted Mr. Liberty there. There was a satisfying metallic sound as the figure slid into the mechanical guide. With a firm turn clockwise, Klaus triggered a secret mechanism. Beneath his feet, it began to vibrate, gears turned, and inside the entire Statue of Liberty, things began to work. Whatever Gustav Eiffel, the ingenious metalworker, had come up with back then, it still worked quickly and thoroughly today. The thick rust that had infested the Statue of Liberty almost everywhere dissolved in no time. After a few minutes, Lady Liberty looked as radiant and proud again as she had all those years before. In New York, there were a lot of rumors and theories over the next few days as to why Lady Liberty had virtually healed herself. Real and self-proclaimed experts spoke out. But nobody found out the truth that Klaus and his friends had discovered Gustav Eiffel's secret. And the only one who had an inkling of it, the famous naked cowboy, beamed even more than usual over his whole face in the next few days. But he would never reveal his knowledge. Just a day later, the three children had arrived back safely in Cologne. Aunt Virginia had fully recovered at the same time as Lady Liberty, and now seemed even stronger and healthier than before. And someone else was happier than they had been in a long time, because the graffiti sprayers of New York had published a photo of their newest gang member online, of Fabio from Germany. He was now envied by everyone at school, and proudly talked about his artist friends in New York, whom he would surely visit again soon. Only one person was not at all happy with the outcome of the story. The Baron had not made a fortune with his real estate speculation around the Statue of Liberty, but had lost a few $1 million. But one day, he was sure, he would put a stop to Aunt Virginia and those terrible children once and for all. He swore revenge, whatever the cost.